We three kings of Israel, Saul, David, and Solomon, and now we are back into Solomon. Solomon his reign has been established. God has established him over the kingdom, and we ended last time with 1 Kings chapter 3. My name is Adam, and we are going through the beginning parts of Solomon's reign. And this is going to be all the good parts, all the good things, and it's going to feel really good. And we're going to end it maybe not on such a feel-good note, but that's in the future. Let's push that off for now and continue on where we are. At the end of chapter 3 of 1 Kings, we saw that all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered. They stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do him justice. Chapter 4, King Solomon was king over all Israel and Judah, all of it. Important because he was the last one that was. Truly, I guess his son for a little while was, and then things started breaking up after that. Chapter 2, and these were his high officials. Azariah, the son of Zadok, was the priest. Elihoreph and Ahijah, the sons of Shisha, were secretaries. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was in command of the army. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Azariah, the son of Nathan, was over the officers. Zabud, the son of Nathan, was priest and king's friend. That's kind of interesting. Why is that? Because in Proverbs 17:17, written by Solomon, we have this note that a friend loves at all times and a brother is born for adversity. Solomon would know, given the things that his brothers had been through. Remember, sons of David. Remember, was it Amnon and Tamar? And the things that Amnon did to her, and then he was killed by his brother, and his brother tried to take over the kingdom, and another brother tried to take over the kingdom, and thought they were going to have Saul killed, and then tried to take his father's concubine, almost the equivalent of trying to take his wife. There's all kinds of issues that went on there. Adversity is what Solomon knew among his brothers. So he would know when he says, a friend loves at all times, but a brother is born for adversity. Moving on, verse 6 of 1 Kings 4. Ahishar was in charge of the palace, and Adoniram, the son of Abda, was in charge of forced labor. Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel who provided food for the king and his household. Each man had to make provision for 1 month in the year. These were their names: Ben-Hur in the hill country of Ephraim, Ben-Deker in Makaz, Sha'albim, Beth-Shemesh, and Elon Beth-Hanan. Easy to say. It's going to be a lot of stuff difficult to say here, but we're going to get through it all. Verse 10, Ben-Hesed and Arabath. To him belonged Soko and all the land of Hefer. Ben-Abinadab, there we go, in all Nephath Dor, he had Taphah, the daughter of Solomon, as his wife. Baana, the son of Ahilud, and Ta'anak, Megiddo, and all Beth-Shean, that is beside Zerathon below Jezreel, and from Beth-Shean to Abel-Maholah, as far as the other side of Jokmeam. Ben-Geber and Ramoth-Gilead, he had the villages of Jair, the son of Manasseh, which are in Gilead, and he had the region of Argob, which is in Bashan, 60 great cities with walls and bronze bars. Ahinadab, the son of Edo in Mahanaim, Ahimaaz in Naphtali, he had taken Basemath, looks like Basemath. I don't think that's the actual pronunciation. We're going to call her Basemath, because that sounds a lot better. The daughter of Solomon as his wife, Baana, the son of Hushai in Asher and Baalath. Verse 17, Jehoshaphat, the son of Parua in Issachar, Shimei, the son of Elah in Benjamin, Geber, the son of Uri in the land of Gilead, the country of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and of Og, king of Bashan. And there was one governor who was over the land. So he had one governor and sounds like 12 guys under him, all responsible, one each month for the food that comes in. There was a lot of food to come in. I believe 1 Kings does go over all of that as well. Yes, we'll see that in just a minute, why there were 12 different people that were needed, and each month somebody gets it, and then the rest of the year they've just got to, prepare for that month. That's going to be their month. Yeah. So, Verse 20, Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Understand, as many as the sand by the sea. That was a promise that God had given them. If we look at Genesis 22:17, where God says, I will surely bless you. I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring will possess the gate of his enemies. This was right after Abraham did not spare Isaac, but was willing even to sacrifice him, believing that God could raise him from the dead. And God gives him this promise. Your offspring are going to be as many as the sand on the seashore, when he had one son. And he wasn't going to see it, but it did come to fruition even here and continues to this day, right? We know that. So that's verse 20. Verse 21, Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms, from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. All right, so he ruled over not just Israel, it sounds like, but all the other kingdoms. And they served Solomon all the days of his life. Verse 22, Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores. And understand, this is not just Solomon himself. This is everybody involved with Solomon, all the people that he was responsible for, and that were taking care of things around him. Verse 22, Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Tifsah to Gaza, over all the kings west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all sides around him. Very good. And Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan even to Beersheba, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, all the days of Solomon. So there's a lot of food coming in every day for Solomon, right? But there was also a unified Israel that lived in peace. But notice that all the enemies still hadn't been completely driven from the land. This will come back, and this will actually take Solomon's heart away from God, even with some of the amazing things that we're going to see going on with Solomon. At any rate, moving forward, we know that's a lot of food going on at this time. Verse 26, Solomon also had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Okay, that's a lot of stalls, a lot more stalls than horsemen. Verse 27, and those officers supplied provisions for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table, each one in his month. They let nothing be lacking. Barley also and straw for the horses, and swift steeds they brought to the place where it was required, each according to his duty. God gave Solomon wisdom, verse 29, and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed all the wisdom of all the people of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. We get to see some of that in Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, and the book of the Song of Solomon, and in Ecclesiastes, wonderful things. Verse 33, he spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish, and people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. God was reaching out to other nations through his chosen people. Even in Solomon's time, very much a flawed and fallen man, what we can see is God reaching out to other nations and bringing the nations to himself. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And now we're getting into chapter 5. Now we get into chapter 5, where he starts making preparations for this thing that God promised David. He told David, you will not build me a house, you will not build me a temple, but your son after you will. And so we see that in verse 1 of chapter 5, now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father. For Hiram always loved David. And Solomon sent word to Hiram, you know that David my father could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. And so I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. As the Lord said to David my father, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, will build the house for my name. Now therefore command that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me, and my servants will join your servants, and I will pay for your servants such wages as you set. For you know that there is none among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians. That's very good, right? I mean, the compliments brings you a very long way. Verse 7, as soon as Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, blessed be the Lord this day who has given to David a wise son to be over this great people. We can see the hand of the Lord reaching out to other nations whom he did not choose, but he still wanted to bring to himself. The reason he chose Israel was not for Israel's sake. It was not because Israel was so good. He chose Israel to bring other people to himself, to bring himself glory, because that's the way it should be. And that's what brings us the most joy and the most happiness, is bringing him glory. It's all set up that way. Every bit of it is set up for that purpose. So verse 8, and Hiram sent to Solomon saying, I have heard the message that you have sent to me. I am ready to do all you desire in the matter of cedar and cypress timber. My servants will bring it down to the sea from Lebanon, and I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you direct. And I will have them broken up there, and you will receive it, and you will meet my wishes by providing food for my household. So Hiram supplied Solomon with all the timber of cedar and cypress that he desired, while Solomon gave him 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, and 20,000 cores of beaten oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. Hiram, something like that. Hiram, probably. I don't know. And the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he promised, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. Verse 13, King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all of Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men. Remember, that was something that God said was going to happen. He's going to take your sons and force them into labor. Well, he did that here. Yes, it was for a good cause, but still. God said it was going to happen, and it's happening. Probably it happened before that, obviously, for warfare, but in this case, even in times of peace, they were drafted. Verse 14, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. That's not a bad gig, to be honest with you. I could do that. Work for a month and then 2 months at home. A month away, 2 months at home. That's not too bad. Adoniram was in charge of the draft. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country. You wonder how some of this stuff got done? How were the pyramids built? Well, if you had this many laborers at your disposal, you probably could have done the same thing. Verse 16, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who carried the work, at the king's command, they quarried out great costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebal did the cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. We won't get into it now, but next time in chapter 6 of 1 Kings, we're going to get into where Solomon builds the temple. And there's an incredible, what do you call it? I don't know if you call it soliloquy or what, but you would call it something. Once the temple is built, Solomon's dedication is just a wonderful, wonderful dedication. Evangelism was not dead in the Old Testament. It was something that Solomon desired other people to see the temple and to come to God through it. So this is what is happening as he's building the temple. And I think this is what is on his mind the whole time, and probably why he can draft forced labor. You've got a couple of things going on there. First of all, 1 month on, 2 months off. That's a pretty good deal right there. So he's not drafting forced labor and making it into slave labor like the slaves in Egypt. So Something to keep in mind. With that, it's not slave labor like we would think of it, or forced servanthood like we might think of it. But then also the purpose behind it, knowing the good purpose that he had and executing it in wisdom, I think went a very long way for Solomon. At any rate, what we see here is another example of Solomon. This whole idea of trusting, he is doing and he is trusting God in the things that he is doing. And we'll see God's provision in it in incredible ways if we really think about it. But yes, we can already see the provision of some of God's promises. Israel outnumbered, right? His number was as much as the sand on the seashore. That's something that God promised Abraham a long time ago. Genesis 22:18, right after 22:17. And in your offspring will all the nations of the earth be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. All the nations blessed because of Solomon's obedience to God as well, at least in this area, right? And we see that at the time, all the nations are blessed because of the wisdom of Solomon as well. In James chapter 1, talks about the testing of your faith, right? Developing perseverance. And then he talks about hearing and doing the word. And let's come to a different place. Oh, where is it? Now I'm losing it. If any of you lacks wisdom. Just a moment. I will be there. Okay. Starting this again. James chapter 1. Verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind, and that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Again, we see do. What is the doing? Asking God for wisdom, trusting. And we trust God and we have that faith, he will give it to us. But once we start doubting, I mean, that in and of itself, it just makes sense. There's no wisdom in that. So it's already self-defeating once we start doubting. But what a promise. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach. We will be given wisdom if we ask God for it. We have that promise. Do we seek out that wisdom? Do we seek out that wisdom as the rulers all around Solomon did when they came to Solomon? We have God's Spirit in us. We have that promise of wisdom for us. Do we seek it out, or do we take it for granted and just leave it out there? Do we ask God for it? Do we say, Lord, give me wisdom? Or do we just leave it there? It's right there for the taking. God will give it to us. It may not always be in the way that we want, but God will give it to us. So that's another thing that we should do, trusting, knowing that we don't have to go and traverse the lands to try to find this ruler to get the wisdom that way. It's written down for us in the scriptures, the things that Solomon said. We have that wisdom immediately right before us, but if we lack wisdom, let us ask God, and he will give it to us. So let's do that, trusting in what he says. Next time, we'll find out about the building of the temple.